Hello, Silverpaw Reads here, and now we are doing Chapter 7 of Spike. Would you look at him, that loser? The red-haired girl next to her only offered a brief glance before taking another deep puff of her cigarette. I mean, she continued, we've been in the same class for years, and he's never had a girlfriend. Like, what, is he gay or something? The third girl in the trio, the dark-haired one, shook her head. He's definitely not gay. Emo, maybe? The red-haired girl suggested. Totally emo, she, the blonde girl, agreed. She folded her arms and looked arched-browed and unimpressed at the boy they talked about. There came a giggle from the dark-haired girl, who let her fingers play through her curls. She put out her cigarette and looked at the blonde friend. Why this sudden interest in what's-his-name? You keen on him? She smirked. Ew. The blonde girl grimaced. How could anyone like him? Seriously, look at him. Like, how he dresses? It's just plain awful. She sneered. He's got no fashion sense whatsoever. Oh, why? I don't know, the red-haired girl said and exhaled smoke. I mean, if he just changed his style, got his hair fixed, and maybe smiled for a change, I think he might have been a bit handsome. She looked thoughtfully up in the sky, then added how she liked his voice. Yeah, but you've always had this thing for weirdos, Lynn, the blonde girl said with a gloating smile. What? Josh was not a weirdo, red-haired Lynn said, insulted. Class president, former of a math and science club? The blonde one replied and put her hand to her forehead, forming an L for loser with her thumb and index finger. Need I say more? The girl went silent. Lynn angrily took a deep puff of her cigarette. The blonde girl stood in the corner of the shed they were hiding behind and scowled at the boy. Suddenly, the previous thoughtful dark-haired girl turned her head and looked at her. Say, April? April, the blonde, looked at her in the corner of her eye. What? The brown-haired girl smiled wide. I'll give you my newest pair of jeans if you go out on a date with him. With who? April asked. With Emo Boy over there, came the reply. No way! April laughed. I'm not going to sink that low for a pair of jeans. They're Levi jeans. The brown-haired girl smirked. April gasped wide-eyed. Levi's? Spike sat quietly on the bench far away from everyone else, enjoying the solitude, when suddenly a skinny blonde girl with a ponytail walked over to him. Hello, she said. Spike looked at her unimpressed and didn't reply. She had her arms folded right under her breasts, making them almost pop out of her pink tank top, obviously trying to somewhat seduce him with her cleavage. I'm gonna, ask you something, she said, eyes looking like they were half closed and tired, though it was probably just her attempt to look sarcastic and careless. Spike didn't like her at all, and instead found himself rather disgusted by her and that attitude. She continued, I'm inviting you on a date. Saturday at 9 p.m.? Spike didn't say anything, he just sat there nonchalantly staring at her like he'd rather want her to leave him the hell alone. Okay, she said, arching a brow. Well, I'll meet you at Franklin's. With those words, she turned and walked away with a satisfied smirk on her face, satisfied that the promised Levi jeans would soon be hers. However, her expression dramatically changed when a low reply came from Spike. Who says I'm going? She veered around fast and marched over to where he sat and glowered at him. May I ask why the hell not? Spike didn't bother looking at her. All he said was, I don't date sluts. April was fuming. She stood in front of Spike, staring furiously at him. Listen, limp dick, she said, sodden, and pointed her finger at him, showing she was serious. You're going to go out with me whether you like it or not. Got it? Bite me, Spike snarled. She was so angry she was about to explode, but she grit her teeth, clenched her fists, and attempted to control herself and not slap his face. What the fuck is your problem? She shouted at Spike. I can't believe I even asked you. I was promised a pair of the most expensive and awesome jeans there if I asked you out. But you know what? I don't care about those anymore. You, whatever your name is an asshole. A beautiful girl comes to you and asks you out on a date and you reject her and call her a slut? What the hell's wrong with you fucking asshole? Spike was still sitting, the same unimpressed, unmoved expression on his face. He just snorted and didn't find her worth talking to. She's just another selfish girl who thought she was all that. She kept yelling at him, nagging him with her annoying, nasally voice, and stared intensely at him the whole time. Spike hated being stared at, and not only was she staring him down, but because of all her yelling, other people were staring at them as well. Spike tried to ignore them, tried to tune out the girl's yelling with his own thoughts. He looked up in the clouds, the same ones he'd admired right before she came over to him, and disturbed his philosophizing. They drifted by and changed shape, dancing in front of the sun, crashed into one another, all in slow motion. Looking at the clouds calmed him somehow. They fascinated him, and he envied everything about them. Being completely free, carried around by the wind, being far away from everyone and everything, and not having to worry about a single thing. Not even death. Clouds didn't die, they just changed shape, turned into something else, but without losing their freedom. Spike sighed, wishing that there was really such a thing as reincarnation. Then he'd wish for nothing more than to be reborn a cloud. Hello? Are you fucking listening to me? Spike sighed and stood up from the bench she'd been sitting on. She eyed him closely and as he stood up, turned around and looked down at her. "What the hell's your problem, huh?" Spike snorted again. "Isn't it obvious? You're my problem. All I want to be is left the fuck alone, and then you come along. Pretending you want to go out with me because of some kind of bet. Did you seriously think I'd go out with a selfish bitch such as you? An immature nobody who secretly smokes behind a shed, but has to be accompanied by a minor crowd to witness how freaking cool she thinks she is. Do you think anyone would be attracted to you? I'm not saying I'm all that. I'm just saying you're so low that even an insignificant piece of shit like myself rejects you. Now, whatever there is left of conscience inside me tells me I should feel sorry for you, but I don't want to waste my pity on the likes of you. You're just not worth it." She stood there moping, her anger expression saddened to the point where one would even spot the traces of tears in her eyes. Spike understood he hurt her feelings, but he didn't care. She needed to hear the bitter truth. Besides, it was a more efficient way to get rid of her without having to physically hurt her. Spike stared at her some more, his look shifting from one eye to the other. Then he repeated, "You're just not worth my pity." And with that, he turned around and left. Discreetly glancing over his shoulder, he saw her watching him leave, tears streaming down her face, and a few of the people standing to the closest to her started chuckling. Worst case scenario, all the shame and embarrassment he'd brought upon her would probably lead her to suicide, but Spike didn't care. He wasn't in the mood to care, and in fact part of him would like to see the death of her, just because that part of him enjoyed tragedies of others. He loved to see some carnage or even a school massacre. He hated his fellow students with passion and would sometimes sit quietly somewhere, picturing the brutal deaths of each one of them with a gloating smile on his face. It helped him through the day, and the knowledge that they were all going to die someday, that in just a matter of years he'd hopefully never have to see any of them again. School was just about the second worst place Spike could be. The single worst place being Chuck's house. He'd never been much of a people person. Ever since he was little, he'd always been a misfit. None of the others would play with him. They thought he was weird just because he was quiet and didn't really know how to play. Not the same way they did. The stories Spikes would come up with a few times they played were sad and gruesome stories, and nothing like the high-spirited childish games the other would play, where everything was fun and nothing was serious. Spike wasn't used to fun. He was too troubled inside to even know how to have fun anymore the way they did. At school, there were only two kinds of people. There was him, and then there were the others. Spike never liked the others. He was someone the others didn't understand and didn't know how to deal with. He was strange, and where the knowledge stops, the violence begins, so the other kids began bullying him instead. They called him names, said horrible things to him, hurtful things. When they said it, Spike would curse at them and call them even worse things. Of course, they wouldn't tell the teachers about it, and Spike was locked alone in an empty office as punishment, where he had to sit on a chair in a corner facing the wall until they came and told him he could leave. Obedient as he was, Spike didn't move a muscle while sitting there. He hated those timeouts. The silence left him alone with his thoughts, thinking of what others had said to him, those hurtful things, while he fought to hold back his tears. Things didn't get any easier at school as the years went by. He had trouble concentrating because of the flashbacks and nasty thoughts that assailed him every day, every hour, every second. They just wouldn't leave him alone, and it affected how he performed at school. The others would mock him for his low grades and how the teachers scolded him for never doing his homework, which he wanted to do, but he never got any help with them, and besides, seldom had he had the time to do them. He was being called a retard, and that hurt. He remembered all too well the one day at the gym. He had been reluctant to change clothes or shower in front of the other boys, so one day they gathered around him and managed to force some of his clothes off. When they saw the scars, Spike winced and tried to hide himself. The crowd of boys around him stared, gaping, and then one of them took notice of how ashamed Spike seemed to be of his scars and started laughing at him. Spike felt a strong hatred build up inside him, and he attacked them. The fight quickly turned bloody, and most of the blood coming from Spike, who was being overpowered and pushed down on the concrete floor, while the boys took turns kicking him. When Spike was unable to fight anymore, near fainted, they took his clothes and tossed them into the shower and left him alone, bleeding in the changing room. It was winter, so he had to stay there until his clothes were dry before he could leave, which made him come home late, and he got a beating for it. The teachers, as usual, believed the other boys when they came first, and told that Spike had started the fight. The teachers never believed him. Never. The boy who'd started all the fight in the changing room was Marco. He was also the boy who from that day on made his hobby to bully Spike and make sure his every day at school was hell, and he was quite good at just doing that. Spike found another empty bench and sat down on it. Looking around him at the different groups scattered around the schoolyard, he suddenly spotted Sam laughing and talking with some of his classmates. Even junior high, Sam was a popular kid. Then, alas, a little too late, he noticed Marco's group. They were walking towards him. Marco was a head shorter than Spike, but he still had the guts to pick fights with him, though mostly because he was, like he'd been for long as Spike could remember, always backed up by his faithful, cowardly crew. Marco had a wide smirk on his face, his head tilted upwards with a cocky attitude. The boys behind him sniggered and clenching their fists as they approached Spike. Spike sighed and reluctantly stood up. Reluctantly because he had been enjoying sitting in peace, but he stood up because he enjoyed stating how Marco was shorter than him, and to show he wasn't afraid of his pitiful gang.